It's hard to shift a paradigm, even at the best of times, and perhaps even harder in the best of times. But the global disruption of the COVID pandemic certainly isn't the best of times, and so much has changed in 18 months. We need a term to use when organizations or people fall back on the comfort of the way things have always been done. I think we need a new term, not one to deny the past, not one to condemn old ideas and principles, but one that we can share as a signal that maybe we're being myopic, maybe we're falling back on old ways, maybe we're not embracing the future and the opportunities therein. We need a term we can use that encourages without offending, a term where we can acknowledge the responsibility for what has come before, but also prompts us to look at a new way of doing things. For now, then, I'm going to use the word sameism. Sameism. Sameism isn't intended to condemn old ideas and practices. It just prompts us. It's a cue to be objective and critical of how we operate, with a keen eye as to how it could be better. Watch out for, say, sameism. We could say that, or we're just spouting sameisms. What part of sameism should we keep, and what part needs to be changed, for example? One thing for sure, Royce Chwin, CEO Destination Vancouver, is definitely not mired in sameism or the status quo. In June, at a hybrid online and in-person AGM, Royce unveiled the organization's new name, Destination Vancouver, formerly Tourism Vancouver. And more importantly, with a new name comes a new mandate, an expanded focus which includes destination development in addition to promotion. The goal, simply put, enable and support a stronger, more resilient tourism ecosystem and economy in Vancouver. Royce Chwin isn't one to mince words. A month ago, he boldly stated at the ECM Americas conference that Vancouver was firmly embracing the concept of destination management. A bold statement and a bold new path, and one that he and the Destination Vancouver board support and have fully embraced. Good morning, Royce. How are you? Where are you? What's it like?
Good morning, David. I'm doing outstanding. I'm here in beautiful downtown Vancouver. The weather is beautiful. I'm looking out into Burrard Inlet. I'm watching people move around again. The hope is here.
Well, that's really exciting, and it is similar here in Ontario. We're starting to see people moving around. We're certainly not past it, but we're on the upward curve. On that curve, so many things have changed, but one of the biggest things, and one of the moments that really sort of stopped me in the last month, was when you made that statement at the ECM Americas conference. I thought it was so bold. I have worked with destinations over a decade who've been moving towards, as they like to say, adding the M to DMO to become a destination marketing and management organization. It's always been tentative, and pre-pandemic, it was still a hotly debated issue as to whether an organization had to be more integrated and management-oriented, or they could stick with marketing. You came right out and you did something I haven't seen in that decade, which is you drove a stake in the ground and said, Tourism Vancouver is shifting over to a destination management model that really focuses on promotion and destination development. Tell me a little bit about the history of that, because you've only been there since, is it January a year ago?
You know what? July, I came over here from Alberta, from Travel Alberta. So in less than a year, wow, we were able to get the board on side, fully supportive. The team members rallied, the community and the stakeholder and the members involved in this movement, and we launched at our 118th AGM last week. So I think that says more about the destination's willingness to embrace change and be bold at a time where we have to give ourselves the permission to do that. And it was time for different thinking, and it wasn't just different thinking on paper, but what does it actually mean? And back it up by physically changing your mandate and now build an organization to deliver on the mandate. And so that's everything that's happened. And it all started with the interview. And in that interview, the board said change. And that was last, I think, April. And I said, how much change? Change go back to the same? Or you really want to think about change? And I said, can I just change the name? And they said, I don't see why not. And I said, well, let's have the conversation, because the name has to represent something. It can't be just a physical change. So that's how it started and where we landed.
So I know this though. I've watched your career for about a decade, all the way back to Destination Canada days and Travel Alberta. You've been thinking about engagement for a long time, and you've had a sort of ideal perch, which I call 20,000 feet. You're not above the industry, you're in the industry, but you're at the top level, especially in your Destination Canada days, looking down at what we used to call, the funnel or the sales chain. And you noticed stuff back in the early 2000s about engagement and stakeholders, and I think particularly back to when DC was really working on the what was it called, the Canadian Experiences file. What do we call those?
Canadian Signature Experiences.
Yeah, and I looked at that, and I saw some missing links to operators, and then I saw DC doing something that I didn't expect, which was trying to build those links or increase the capability of those operators. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I will put my hand up and say I am one of two co-conspirators that started the Canadian Signature Experiences program. It was myself and Susan Iris. And in a bid to think about the development or highlighting of projects or experiences relative to when the Olympics were happening, we thought, how can we promote our best? How can we identify the best products? How can we help them develop? And it started off with 200. And we thought, well, wait a minute, maybe this shouldn't be 200. How do you open up some more? And so that was the start and the kickoff the Canadian Signature Experiences program. Of course, it continued on after I left. But that was my real formative education and really understanding how to support small business. What are their needs different from being the promotional engine? Because if not for the experiential reason to join or come to a destination, then what have you got? How do you enable your stakeholders, and how do you engage them in different kinds of conversations? So that was the formative start.
So isn't it interesting? You go from that moment, which was a little more than a decade ago, if my timing's right, to the interview to Vancouver. Now, in between, we'll talk a little bit about Travel Alberta, because I think some amazing stuff happened there, not the least of which is the fact that you really champion the idea of empowering and building up the facility and capability of all sorts of stakeholders, not just operators and businesses, but tourism partners. And if I'm not mistaken, you had some of the first certified destination management executive courses in Canada run by DI, which you hosted at Banff. But let's talk about for a second, you start looking at stakeholders back in the early 2000s at a Destination Canada level, which is kind of interesting because you are at 20,000 feet. You don't really have that connection, but it's obvious to you, I can see this, that if you can't connect to them, how can you promote experiences? You come all the way forward to July 2020, you're rethinking the Vancouver proposition, and stakeholder engagement becomes paramount to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. We require the movement of people for the industry to be successful, and the movement of people is created through experiences, and obviously all the logistics. And so really, how do we ask better and different questions versus what we have done? And so one of those things that have come out of that conversation is, are we industry-led or are we strategy-led? Because they are two very different things. And if we are strategy-led, then are we better positioned to enable or support our stakeholders in the delivery of experiences, which certainly are representative of tourism, but say much more about the reputation of a destination as a whole and some of its parts than being narrow on tourism. So let's expand our thinking and ask better questions about that space.
So in that context, then, when you look at the mosaic that is Vancouver, I mean, I could probably do an inventory of what the core tourism product was, but you've expanded that vision, haven't you? And I mean, we've been at a number of tables together over the last few months, and I know for a fact that, culture, identity, multicultural representations, equity and diversity have all come into your thinking as to what is the Vancouver that the world should see, and how do we do that?
1,000%. And I think there's a real untapped story here that we know that it exists, that Vancouver is known for beyond a tourism destination is diversity and multiculturalism. There's a strong base of product and experiences here for sure. Where I think it's very much untapped, and certainly not a novel idea, but one for us, and that's maker culture. So yes, there's investment in new experiences and bricks and mortar and all of those kinds of things that are important. But the DNA of our destination is its people. And there is such a wealth of stories around makers in this Metro Vancouver region that have not been told. So our job now as an organization in the restructure and reorganization is to put together a digital publishing team that happens to do marketing to tell those stories, to not be always on, but to be always there.
Right.
Where are our right customers and how do we connect those stories that will influence the decisions for people to come to Vancouver, or if they're here, to stay longer?
So let's be really clear then. You are not talking about taking the role of generating the stories. You're talking about taking the role of identifying, amplifying, and in some cases generating, but it's no longer the idea that the DMO is the content producer solely.
I think we're a content partner. There's lots of places out there that are producing content, but where we have to be more fleet of foot is to not be entirely reliant on the stories being produced. We have our own networks and connections with our members and our stakeholders. So why is it that we can't go out and say, you know what, we need 2 hours of your time today. We're going to go to shoot a story about what you're doing, your story, cut and do it and publish it and put it out into our channels. So we can be masters of our own destiny and think about ourselves as digital publishers.
So that's on the promotion side. On the destination development side, the legacy side, what kind of shifts do you anticipate? Will you get involved in, and when I say this with great care, get involved in bricks and mortar. When I ran the regional tourism office in Ontario, we were involved in bricks and mortar, but we had a very clear set of guidelines, which was we would work on pre-planning, engineering, environmental impact stuff that got good things done. And it was a good line and it worked well for us. Do you see a future in Vancouver where you're looking at legacy projects and figuring out what your lane is there and how to serve them without necessarily doing them?
I think so. We still have territory here that we need to chart out. But what we have to help us in those decisions is a great body of strategic work that was done post the Olympics. And in those various plans and iterations, there was a Vancouver 2030 plan as an example. What we did was took an inventory of all of the goals and outcomes that were wanted. And very clearly, 70% of that work was destination development. 30% of it was promotion. And so our role now has got to be able to figure out, so for example, where do we influence and advocate for policy that will allow development and promotion, or allow development to happen? Where do we work and identify individual operators and help either amplify them in the local market, or they're ready to take the step and bring them into the international markets, as an example? Where do we work with the city or a developer to support the creation of more hotels? So I think there's a wide range of places that we can play there. One very recent example that we're working on right now is that we will build a major events business unit inside this organization. It was a very, very clear need. So what we were able to do was to bring 70 plus event producers that had never talked before through the pandemic. We've got them all talking. Are there things that we can do there that we can help them enable the development of different kinds of cross promotions and festivals? So we're looking at programming 52 weeks of the year. And can we work with the city or other stakeholders to create or attract other festivals to come into the city? So the dimension of development is exciting because it's wide ranging from bricks and mortar to policy to animation and programming. So
that continuum, like you said, it's incredibly wide, from the individual operator that you're enabling and making more, we use the term highly shareable and highly shared. There's two sides to that, right through to the legacy value project where you may be playing a catalytic role. You have a great acronym that you use to guide your role and function in those situations. I think it's LEAF. Can you tell us a little bit about LEAF?
Sure, the LEAF. And so when we were going through the Destination Vancouver stakeholder engagement, we had one-on-ones, we had focus groups, and we received all kinds of great insight and all kinds of asks to do all kinds of things. There's no way that we'll be able to do it all. So what we said was, how do we identify what we need to do with the capacity and resources we have? So very simply running it through a filter. Where are we best positioned to lead? So the easy one, promotions. How do we enable? So an example is, how can we enable a festival producer to expand the content of that festival? Where do we lead? Where do we label? Where do we influence? So how could we influence policy decisions, whether it's at the level working with city council, or at the provincial level, or even federally if we're part of a group? And then lastly, how do we show leadership? By getting out of the way and following an industry lead on a project. And our best places to follow in that space. So again, that's going to allow us to assign resources. It's going to help inform how we build the organizational structure and where we focus on priorities in the future.
So you can imagine talking to you, Royce, is music to my ears. I'm a huge advocate of the model that you're developing. I'm fully supportive of it. Let me ask you this question. Would we be here today making these kind of wholesale, important, necessary, latent, but definitely behind the curve changes that should have happened a decade ago? Would we be here if it wasn't for the pandemic?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure the will for change would have necessarily been there, because as we all know, when everything's great, why do we need to change? But we know that structurally and deep down, the cracks are there. But it's great. The money's rolling in, the visitors are here. And so I don't know that we've been able to do this in the speed at which we were able to do this, if not for the pandemic. And that's where the boldness of the board comes in, and the team and the stakeholders, to say, you know what, the model now has been broken. So now this is our opportunity to revisit, keep the good things, but also we have to chart a new direction. Because if we can't answer the question around relevance and value, we are in deep, deep trouble as an organization going forward. And I don't think we were perhaps prepared to answer those questions prior to the pandemic with real honesty.
Well, and that, I mean, the influence has been profound, not just on our organizations, but on our technologies, on the way we interact with other people. Our friend Dan at CrowdRift, Dan Holloway, says, you know, every interaction we've had in the pandemic starts and ends on a digital device, whether it's ordering a pizza or talking to your mom on Skype, or checking if your vaccine numbers come up. You know, that's really changed us. But what's also changed us, though, is this idea of agility. I think in crisis, people become agile. So Destination Vancouver is being very agile. We talked earlier, and you talked about the need in the next sort of near future, the next quarter and the quarter after that. There's no question that businesses need help recovering. Frontline businesses that were teetering perhaps on the edge of closures. We all know restaurants and accommodations and attractions fit that bill. It is an agile Destination Vancouver that's able to turn and say, okay, this isn't necessarily our role and function forever, but right now we need to do this. Isn't that a big shift for DMOs to be able to say right now? Because I swear they were oil tankers in the past on a trajectory to the, you know, the Gulf of Hormuz, and they weren't turning till they got there, right?
Yeah, you know what, you're bang on. And so one of the things that we did when I came on board, in order to perpetuate that kind of thinking, being agile, being tourism ninjas, was to blow up the 3 and the 5 year rolling business plan, because the pandemic does not care. And we know that we are impacted by policies and directives, provincial health orders that can sway our business from one day to the next. So one of the sayings that we had was, our best laid plans are a minute away from being completely stopped or blown up. So how do you change the thinking? Well, for one, we can look far out and we can say by 2026, we expect the Metro Van visitor economy, based on what we know today, could get back to $11 billion. We get a little bit of a North Star. But to get there, let's start looking at it in 2-year business sprints. And within that business sprint timeline, let's chunk it out into 4 6-month segments. And those 6-month segments can move back, or they can move forward and move either direction quickly based on policy directives. And we have done exactly that. We've been able to move some stuff up, and we've been able to halt and push stuff around. And as the royal eye, I think it's worked reasonably effective, because we don't have money to chuck around. We're not going to throw good money after bad. So that thinking and creating agility in our planning was more about the now, with a nod a little bit to the future here.
But now I've heard something in there, and I really love it. This idea of 6-month blocks that are mobile, kind of like, you know, programming a network and moving the shows around. This is really important, because I've seen a lot of good reaction to the pandemic. DMOs that have shifted to just, going into that front line, help the operator get back on their feet. But I shudder a little bit because I realize there's nothing past the edge of the cliff that 6 months or whenever that changes. The idea of having the next block of strategic opportunity, not necessarily strategy, ready to move it in or move it out or shift it up or down is really important. Otherwise, I worry we get stuck in that lane of becoming this hand to mouth, working directly on promotions all the time. So I love the strategic block model. What are some of the other blocks when you look out a little further than pure recovery? So, you talked a little bit about your dedicated meetings team. What else is on the agenda?
Sure. Well, let me rephrase how we think about moving forward, because that really helped inform the strategy. So what you won't hear from Destination Vancouver is any talk about recovery, because recovery sets a mindset to go back to the past. And if the past has been severely damaged, I'm not sure why we'd go back there. And I don't mean to be preachy, it's just mindset. So the first part of this plan is all about rebuilding the sector, because it truly has been damaged. So how to rebuild cash flow, workforce, visitor volumes, all those kinds of things. So we planned and built pieces around that, whether it's local promotions, Love Vancouver, Explore Vancouver. The second part of this, though, and a lot of people are talking about the restart, but for us, restart means US and international travel. So when do the borders restart? When does international flights restart? When do we restart our relationships with international trade and media? And so now when we look at a rebuild phase and a restart phase, we've actually started to plunk in all of those pieces as it relates to the international markets. And those are landing in the next 6-month segment. It's a blend of art and science in doing this, but we're engaging in these conversations, the partnership conversations in destination with the airlines, with the airport and other key stakeholders. Cruise is another example. So while we're advocating for the restart of cruise versus February 2022, we're also working with Deloitte and the Port Authority on a restart plan, a safe restart plan for cruise as well. So that's plunked in the time frame. We can move it up, we can move it back.
Let's talk a little bit about the new emerging tourism intent of the traveler. And, Vancouver, BC, the West Coast has done particularly well with China travelers and South Asian travelers. I imagine that continues. I know we're all under some political world pressures that will influence that. I see a Vancouver on a world stage that also has a deeper reach than that and has a broader appeal. Is that something that will come to be in the next decade, do you think?
I think so. I'm hesitant in that because I think what we're all still trying to figure out is how the pandemic has impacted travel, our feeling of closeness, our feeling of travel. We've done a good and a terrible job of connecting safety with travel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I agree. That really impacts how we get those messages out. One of the initiatives that we took in terms of our research here was something we called the Available Traveler Project. And that was to better understand the nuances and influencers on travel perception and behavior beyond what we were sort of seeing and whether or not we could activate that. And the great and easy example is safety. So if we think about that in the context of our other markets around the world and what's happening in this destination, that's a story that we have to unfold. And what's, I think, particularly interesting in the story is that our destination is so impacted by the decisions that government entities make in the perception of the destination's willingness to welcome people and this idea of safe. And the destination is safe.
For sure it is. And then let me give you a little sort of one-on-one focus group here. Sitting out here in Eastern Canada, thinking about places to go, I will tell you a lot of people have BC and Van on the top of their list. And I'm going to laugh at this, and so are you. And I think sometimes old brands really stick in your head. And I keep thinking Supernatural BC. And there is, in the pandemic, we've all shifted to outdoor and distance. And so, I mean, I love Calgary and I love Banff and Jasper, etc. But the image that comes to mind when I think of being, outside and safe is Supernatural BC. So maybe there's some old brand equity there. I also will tell you that the handling of the pandemic in BC by Bonnie Henry, your medical officer of health, seems to us out here to have been exceptional. You may not see that when you're living in it, but I think your rep is quite high on that safe and accessible to the outdoors kind of quotient, which will have a big impact with domestic travelers and early American travelers. I wonder if that becomes more of a consideration. If you think about the last 10 years since you were at DC, there's a heavy focus on driving people into cities by showing the cultural diversity of cities. And Destination Canada spent a lot of time on Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Halifax. I wonder if the angle for the next bit, as you try to communicate safety, is also try and communicate proximity to open space and outdoors. Thank you. Oops.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great observation, and I think question all into one, because cities have been disproportionately hit. And when I say that, people, well, what are you really talking about? Well, we lost our visitors. We lost our office workers, and we lost our local residents who didn't go out as much. So there's a triple hit of impact. And the allure of Canada being recognized worldwide as this beautiful place of open spaces has now further pushed people out into other remote areas and rural areas, which is great. I am not stuck on everybody needs to come here and nobody needs to visit anything else. But now we have to figure out how to balance that and use the uniqueness of Vancouver's positioning in that we're like a giant resort city. So you can go hang out in a beautiful hotel with a great poolside setting and whatever else, and then you can walk 10 minutes and you're in the ocean or you're at the beach. So we think about that outdoors resort setting where you go across the bridge and you're up on grouse or cypress. I think we've got a real unique positioning that we can use here in the South Coast for what we have to offer that allows for all of that to happen.
I completely agree. I completely agree with you.
We'll leverage that. We've got Destination BC really behind the need to focus on the city experience, but that city experience in proximity and connectiveness with the nature attributes that are so strong and we're so well known for.
So as we sort of get near to the end here, I think phenomenal work has been done in Vancouver in the past, and we all know that work. I think it has a special jewel in the crown sort of position. How are you going to work on what Jack Johnson calls the shared community value, that the people who make up the mosaic of your city come to, and they've always supported Tourism Vancouver, and now in its Destination Vancouver iteration, what is it that will do that will really cement that shared value proposition? And I guess it's a bit of a rhetorical question because you've already talked about destination development and promotion, but talk to me about working more closely with citizens.
I think it starts with a revitalized purpose statement that we also shared with our audience at the AGM. And that is to transform communities and people through the power of tourism. And that recognizing that tourism is not the end state, it's the enabling sector. And so to do that, it's about continuing what we've done in some good work in the past about connecting with communities, but how do we connect differently with the variety of communities that we have out here? So as an example, we're working on an MOU with Indigenous Tourism BC. They're importantly, a very important partner as it relates to supporting the continuation of culture. But beyond that, what are the other stories of multicultural communities that will show that tourism is the great enabler in the community around makers, as I talked about earlier? So it's an actual tactical example that we can use to get out and to bring those voices to bear that really highlight the diversity of this destination that we know as Vancouver, Destination Vancouver. And there's so much more that we can do to stay connected with our community that we're going to do. And just on that, it's not just about profit, it's about people and planet. And we need to put our money where our mouth is in those areas.
Well, I love your statement about tourism enriching the lives of people all over the world and connecting us. I think it is the higher purpose that really makes all of this worthwhile. I love the work you're doing on engagement. I will say that Vancouver is, in my opinion, one of the most diverse cities in the world, and we both, you and I, traveled all over the place. Isn't it great to come home and say, yeah, this is a really cool, diverse, wide and deep place?
It is. I'm born and raised here for 40 years, spent 10 years in Alberta, learned so much. I have my heart still for Alberta and what I learned, but to come back here to the place that I came from, I see this city and the destination and its people in a different light. And I'm grateful and thankful to have been chosen to lead the change here in partnership with so many others, because people were willing to be open and say, what are your ideas? Let's talk about it and let's see how we make it happen. And that's music to any DO, DMMOs, whatever you want to call us. An organization that's trying to find relevance and value, that is the great magic.
Well, I'll tell you this, Royce. When I heard you taking the job, I was enthused. When I listened to your strategy, I was ecstatic. So I'm really glad you're there. I think it's going to be a great decade for us going forward. Challenges are challenges, but with the right team in place and the right assets and the right leadership, we can get there. We're at the end. I just want to ask you, give you one more chance. There's so much in the industry we need to do and fix and change or sell or adjust. Any last words of encouragement or caution or something you want to share with other leaders?
Boy, where do I start? Maybe simply by saying, and it doesn't mean to be trite, but be bold. Ask better questions. And where we have found success is rooting it in two simple things: relevance and value. Every single strategy, everything that we do, put it through that. Be bold, ask better questions, relevance and value. And then I think you have a starting place for some great conversations that really will affect some real institutional change.
Well, listen, thanks a ton for that. I will be in Vancouver this summer, and I will be going to Whistler to the bike park. So maybe we'll grab a cup of coffee together. Really
Absolutely.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the time, and thanks for setting up this podcast.
All right, you have a great day. Ciao.
You too. Thanks.